Well, first I'm just going to go over kind of like the old versus the new, kind of where everything's changing, and then I'll go over to and just kind of go through what a data lake is and data warehouse, where's all that. And then second part, I'll just go brief overview of kind of on-prem, which means on-premise, or the cloud, and kind of give actual physical costs and point you to a great article written by a guy from Microsoft that he actually talks about this whole thing. So to start out with, currently most places that are migrating up, they're going to be using a thing called a data warehouse or an on-premise database, which would just mean you have SQL Server, MySQL, Postgres, or some form of that, or some form of database like that. They're just running, going to be on computers that are in their data center locally. And that's pretty much where 99% of the population has data center, or has data now, is going to be on-premise. And as you all probably know, everybody's moving up to the cloud, and there's real benefits of doing that. So I'm going to just go down through this thing. Currently, there's a big thing called a data warehouse or a data mart, which traditionally is going to be a SQL database, SQL Server, Postgres, MySQL, MariaDB, something along those lines, which is going to be just a big, huge database, probably spanning 5 or 6 servers or so, depending on the customer. And that is just going to be strictly SQL, probably very structured data. That the schema, you're going to have, everything is super structured, saying here's your data, here's your name, your address, your zip code, your state, and there's going to be structures like that. Whereas if you probably see NoSQL, which is just, there is no structure. Everything's just kind of hodgepodge.
So, Sayle, let's assume we
don't
know anything about this when you say on-prem.
Okay, on-premise, like I said, is going to be, it will be on, like in a data center, probably attached to the building, or maybe they do a co-location, which is a hosted out data center, essentially. So say you go to a rack space, that would be considered on-prem. So if you rent out a server from them, is that right to you, or is that kind of what?
Yeah.
Yeah, just make sure. Yeah, correct, because I know I go sometimes way over in the technical realm, so catch me if y'all have any questions right then about what I'm talking about. Okay, so that's kind of where things are now, is usually, this part is usually very expensive, and because I mean, you're paying, if you look over here, add those costs up, that's about one server on premise currently.
What are those costs affiliated with?
I'm sorry?
What are those costs affiliated with?
Okay, I probably should say, obviously, I'll get to this a little bit, just add those numbers up and just think that's one server what you're paying in 1 year kind of thing. Yeah, I'll get to the next part later, explain all those numbers. Okay, nowadays, everybody's moving up to the cloud, which is the big buzzword. You got cloud, which is AWS, Azure, Rackspace, Google Compute Cloud, what have you. Essentially, that means it is somebody else's data center that's run by one of those corporations, and they've got millions of servers across the globe that they throw everything into. That's all the cloud is. It's just somebody else's computer. So the big term nowadays is called data lake, which data lake essentially is just a gigantic pool of data. I mean, kind of what it sounds like, but to go into more depth on that, it is essentially taking data. Previously I explained you're gonna have things that are gonna be very structured in a SQL database. A data lake can have structured data, semi-structured data, which means it's something you kind of look at and there's kind of a structure on it, and then just like pure raw data that is a hodgepodge of whatever you've got. You throw it together, you throw it in a data lake. And that's pretty much what a data lake is in a nutshell. When they talk about this thing, they say that you throw that things, they love to use the buzzwords about data lake, but essentially it is a gigantic pool of data of all sorts. So
what's the practical use of that?
Essentially just a gigantic storage. Yeah, okay, let me jump into that too. Okay, practical usage of data lake. Essentially you store all that data in one big place, because previously when you had, like, say, structured data, you had data that was coming across, say, billing data from some other system that was just thrown together, it would be stored in different places. The data lake has it all together. And usually you're gonna have some sort of database developer or something that's gonna be able to tie it all together for you. And there are kind of, I would say, identifiers that allow you to put pieces of data together. So say you've got your billing data over here, you've got your credit card data here, there's gonna be something that pulls them together. And that's gonna be inside the data lake. And then you usually, I should probably also put down here, On the people that can use it, a lot of times are, you're gonna have business analysts, you're gonna have database developers, you're gonna have IT administrators, and usually when you have a old style this right here, you're gonna have business analysts that will run some queries to write some reports, and then you're gonna have the database people. Whereas when you have a data lake, I mean, you have all the data together and everybody can kind of just work seamlessly from the same piece of or should work from the same pool of information instead of having to kind of go out to other different servers to do it. And so, I mean, that's essentially what a data lake is. Some of the prime examples of data lake technologies here, I'll just kind of go down here. I'm going to go with AWS because that's the big 100,000-pound gorilla in the room. They were literally the first cloud provider. They're the biggest. So you'll have stuff like, say, S3. You have S3, you have like Dynamo, DB. I'll explain what these are. They're hosted SQL. Then, I'm trying to think if you would have some others. You have some pieces called Glue, and then you'll have MapReduce. All these are just kind of technologies that are usually used. I'm sorry if that's so low there. Those are your technologies that are usually used in a data lake, say in AWS. And for instance, Tax Act, we use most of these. And I'll just kind of go through what each of these are. S3 is essentially just a file storage. So you have a text file, you have your Word documents, what have you, you put it on your hard drive. Essentially, this is just a gigantic hard drive out in the cloud. DynamoDB is I hate to use the term NoSQL, but that's kind of what everybody uses. It essentially allows you to put pieces of data that do not have any sort of structure to them out there and be able to just read through them, query them, write something in there and say, this is what's in there. That's what DynamoDB is. Hosted SQL is essentially just SQL Server, Postgres, MySQL. It's just a database that they host for you instead of having on a server on-premise. Glue is one of their new products, which actually is kind of a cool product. It allows you to look at any sort of data source, whether it is, say, Dynamo, hosted SQL, or files, and it goes through that and essentially puts all that data into a single database. And I mean, it's really kind of handy because if you want to, say, write, I mean, if you have some text files you want to pull data from and you want to connect that to a SQL server, it allows you to do that easily. And you just write one query, pulls it all out for you. Really, really nice. Another part of this checking right here is called Athena, which that just goes along with Glue. It allows you to mostly read a lot of the text files and everything, mostly from S3. And then MapReduce is, MapReduce on Amazon Cloud is actually probably better known as Hadoop or Spark because MapReduce is the old name for Hadoop. It was a method of querying Hadoop data, and they named it way back when, and then newer models have come out, but it's essentially a Hadoop. If you don't know what Hadoop is, it is essentially a gigantic way of storing lots of data distributed out among a bunch of servers. And you can run processes to look at that data, and it just goes across like up 3 servers up to millions of servers. It's just think of it just as a big hard drive that's spanned out among a data center. And so these are kind of the technologies that are probably good. You'll probably hear a lot of those out, especially when dealing with AWS. There's some in Google and Azure as well. I'm not very familiar with them because I mostly do AWS these days. So I'd say that's probably it for that part. And then these, and I'm jumping on right here. I'll jump back in the middle here. These are kind of what I've explained earlier, what the attributes of having an on-premise versus a cloud data mart, data warehouse, or I would say, call it data lake, whatever you want to call it. These days, there's so many terms for it. Essentially, your old one, the cons of it is you have structured data. There's really not a way to do unstructured data very easily. It's always very, very expensive. Like if you look over there, if you just add those costs up, like it's extremely That's for one server a year on a traditional on-premise server. And then the data is always going to be process data, meaning that you've already gone through and done some processing on it and spit it out for, let's say, a business analyst to throw in a report for your CEO. That's what process data is. And usually it only stores that. So, I mean, you're not going to have any people that are going to look at the all raw data. It's all going to be something in a nice graph you want to see. And that's pretty much all that is stored in a database on-premise for the most part. When you get to something like a data lake nowadays, essentially what you're doing is you're storing everything. You got structured data, unstructured data, you get your raw data coming across. Say you have a business partner that sends you a file that has everybody's credit card information or credit card receipt information and their names or something like that. That is just kind of just dumped out into a file, pushed to you. You store it in there along with your, say, data where you pair that up with, say, oh, this was customer A, he bought all this other data, other stuff from us, it's all together. That's kind of what you would have that in a data lake, it's all together. Data lakes are usually significantly lower cost because they're up in the cloud. You're using only the resources you use, you're not paying for a full server. You can have 20 servers on-prem, you're paying electricity, you're paying the compute costs for it, you're paying hardware maintenance, everything for all those. Whereas in the cloud, you pay for what you use. That's one of the huge benefits of it. And then, as I said earlier, you get your processed data, which is usually what you see in a report. Say you pull up a bar graph that goes, or some sort of graph that goes to your CEO. That's going to be in there. Then you're also going to have the unprocessed data on where that comes from, which is good for when you have an analyst or you want to use it for historical reasons. So you're storing all of it together instead of just a subset. And nowadays, they've got all sorts of crazy things they can do with that data. They can run AI. I mean, there's a big thing now is running AI. Actually, Tax Act is working with a few AI companies that are going through all the data. They just mine through it to look at what kind of things can we pull out of this to see about the customer. I mean, say they want to look at demographics. Say if you bought a house this year, bought a car this year, what you wrote off on your taxes, they're able to pair that in and sell that off to other people for advertising dollars. And they use these just really crazy, think Skynet sort of thing from Terminator. It's happening when they're figuring out all this stuff. But yeah, they will use that and pull it. Yeah, it pulls all the data from you. And the biggest part is you have all of this data together. And it looks at it, it's the big whole, and then it decides what it wants to do with that. So that's kind of where we are today. I'm kind of off the board, kind of just jumping all around here, but that is that on that. I'm sure you're going to have questions. So let me jump over here to kind of why you do on-prem versus cloud. Okay, first off, if y'all want to look, a great article to read on LinkedIn is by a gentleman named Greg Deckler. It's called The Cloud versus On-Prem Costs. Really, really good article, and that's where all these numbers from. It's kind of like the de facto standard. He's a guy from Microsoft that wrote pretty much a large article stating, here's why you should go cloud. And it's really good read, actually very good read on this thing. And I'll just kind of break down some costs that he goes over. I should note this right here, all these numbers are, this is one server, say like a one web server, maybe a little bit, that kind of does some modern traffic. I'm trying to think of a great little example. I mean, probably like y'all's website would be a good one. A good example of this. This would be 1 year cost. Look over here. Okay, first line is computer cost. That's like what you pay for to buy the actual machine and to keep it running for a whole, and this is, I should say, go back and say, this is 1 year of costs. The first line is keeping the computer, buying it, keeping it running, probably your electricity costs, probably housing costs for the year, and that's compute line. Networking is keeping up the network that this thing is connected to. That means just going out, hooking up to the internet, being able to talk to the rest of your machines, actually pushing bandwidth, which means actually how much data you're coming in and out with, and all costs like that. So network cables, everything else along with that. And then storage. That means essentially hard drives. Essentially, you've got to dump all this data you're hosting out on your website. It's got to be stored somewhere. And that's what storage costs is. And labor, that's usually your IT admins. You got somebody that has to go in there. If it goes down at 2 a.m. on a Saturday night, you got to call this person. And that's about what it would cost per year for one person to do that, to host that one machine. So you can tell it's about $9,000, $2,000 almost 1,000, and 775. Actually, I should calculate this out.
Almost exactly.
Is it? Okay. Okay, yeah, 13,000. Okay, and then,
It's 5,672.
okay, 5,672. Okay, so you tell, running one server in your own data center, that's almost 3 times the cost. So I mean, it's a pretty significant savings jumping over, moving up to the cloud. The biggest reason for that is because when you have your on-premise, you're handling all sorts of costs dealing with, say, storage, running your own server there for electricity, and that thing's gonna be on 24/7. And you gotta have people to monitor it all the time, as well as, I mean, electricity, networking costs, you can have a ton of costs associated with it. So essentially, it's kind of nowadays where you're like owning a home versus renting. You call somebody else to take care of it. It's kind of what it comes down to. Versus when you own it, this is you. When you rent, that's you for maintenance. So I mean, I think that I'd say that's probably a pretty good chunk of change. Especially, I mean, it may not seem much for a company, but if you think about it, a good chunk of these companies are running, say, 100, 200 servers. So multiply that out. That's a good amount of money per year savings. And I mean, that's kind of why a lot of people moved up there, because the cloud, they take care of most of the stuff for you. I mean, for instance, zero networking costs. They've already got that built in their data center. They take care of it all. It's essentially a null cost to you. In storage, I mean, these guys run like gigantic machines that have literally hundreds and thousands of terabytes of data storage space. So for them, it is much cheaper than getting over here and spend $990 and buying the hard disk yourself to store it.
So if we were buying more, like old scenario, if we had to grow our server base, how difficult would that have been on-prem versus growing it on cloud?
I'd add that cost on there, and then you also got to worry about, say, you have the real estate. You have enough room in your data center for another server.
Right.
Because if you've ever seen data center, they're just gigantic racks, probably about this tall,
Right.
usually about 30 machines in there. And say you fill up a data center, you can't fit any more. Where are you going to put it? This is a great example. It happens all the time. And then you decide you do have to take one out and put a bigger one in.
Right. And how fast, like how long would that take you the old way to order one, ship, get set up?
I don't know how much it cost. I mean, when I used to do that back in the early 2000s, when I was working in straight IT, it takes about 3 to 4 weeks from Dell.
Right.
So by the time you order,
And versus if you're in AWS,
it's 20 seconds, 30 seconds. Once you sit in there and fill out what you want, hit build,
yeah,
it's there for you.
yeah.
And it's I shall say, it is also probably infinitely scalable for most needs nowadays.
Right.